I think for now, the analysis remains valid. I think we are in a period of flux, however. For now, it's still largely in the lane of diplomatic engagement. I mean, even though Syrian President Bashar al-Assad visited the Emirates, this still is largely at the level of the highest level, but it's still at the level of diplomatic re-engagement. And this is like a culmination of the previous steps that the United Arab Emirates took when their foreign minister visited Damascus in November, and when other countries have done similar visits. Oman, their foreign minister went in January, I think, and there have been other visits. The Egyptians have met on the margins of General Assembly at the foreign minister level, and there have been news reports, they're not totally confirmed, that there have been meetings between intelligence representatives on the Saudi and the Syrian side. So there is a lot of diplomatic activity. I think for now it's remaining at that level. I think the sanctions, especially the Caesar sanctions, continue to block most or a large amount of the economic engagement. Very difficult for countries to re-engage economically without falling afoul, as we say, of our sanctions. I think these sanctions regimes are largely they're either bilateral or they're a couple of countries or entities, the United States, the European Union, that are implementing these sanctions against particular countries, and it's a one-off for each one. There's not a collective sanctioning, as you sort of describe it, as an axis of sanctioned countries. I think the sanctions on Iran are running on their own momentum with some connection to the JCPOA agreement, the nuclear agreement. The Syrian sanctions are running on their own momentum. And now, of course, the Ukraine related Russia sanctions are running on their own momentum. So I think they're not connected in a way that is going to ease them. If one is eased, the other one is eased. I think they're going to stay in place. For example, the Syria sanctions, I expect them to largely stay in place, and it will make it difficult for third country, non-US countries, in other words, to do economic transactions with Syria, with the Syrian government, or with senior officials in the regime. Regarding the Iran angle, I think it's pretty clear that the Arab Gulf countries, in particular, are motivated in their outreach to Syria to try to contain or to limit Iranian influence in Syria. This is one of the key motivations behind their efforts to gradually normalize relations. There are other motivations. They're also interested in countering violent extremism. They're very not at ease with the rise of violent Islamist groups in Syria that now dominate much of the opposition to Bashar al-Assad. And the other motivation that is a big part of the Gulf motivation in general is just this realpolitik assessment that Bashar al-Assad, with Russia help, has won the war. And therefore, they need to develop a foreign policy that is consonant with the realities on the ground. The last thing I would mention in terms of motivations, if I could just add it, is for the UAE in particular, they're also motivated, I think, by their long-term vision for their place in the region and in the wider world. They want to be a hub for economic activity. They want to have relations based on networks and partnerships, and not be caught in a sort of binary choice to be on one side of an issue with a certain group of countries or on the other side with another group. So they're trying to maintain flexibility for the long term. I think Israel definitely, with regard to relations with Arab countries, is highly motivated by the signing of the Abraham Accords. This is a strategic breakthrough for them, and they want to build on it with the particular countries that signed it, and with countries that previously made agreements with Israel outside of the Abraham Accords framework, particularly Jordan and Egypt. So they feel like they have a real breakthrough for new developments and to build on previous developments. And I think they're going to continue to do everything they can to strengthen those ties diplomatically, but also economically. Look for opportunities for investment, look for opportunities for trade, and they will continue this. And I think the type of meeting that you referenced in Egypt, those types of meetings are going on all over the region. It's an amazing series of developments to watch. Of course, I think defining all of them and giving them meaning are the interests of the particular countries. Each country is looking to do things that address its interest, whether they're economic or political, or trying to improve the strategic and regional stability, or to strengthen relations with the United States. I think they're motivated by a cluster of these interests, and it varies a little bit with each country. For a variety of reasons, this is Qatar's moment, so to speak, with Washington. The relation between the U.S. and Qatar has gone through various stages. When I started doing policy with the Gulf about 10, 12 years ago, relations between Qatar and the U.S. were okay, but they weren't great. They've slowly evolved, and you saw in particular recently with leading up to our departure from Afghanistan with the negotiations with the Taliban. Qatar hosted those negotiations and was instrumental in helping to support them, which built some credibility and credit with the United States. They also took some of the Afghanis who were evacuated out of Afghanistan, and now they're doing everything they can as the United States pushes for support for energy for Europe. So I think as your question hints, there are a lot of positive developments in the relationship between the United States and Qatar. Of course, I don't need to emphasize too much that the relationship between the United States and the UAE, for example, is also very strong, built on developments that have gone back 20, 30 years that keep it at a very solid level. My assessment and the assessment of people I work with and that I read here in the US and in the region is that this is more of a perception than a reality. If you look at the situation on the ground in the Gulf region, we have built up a security architecture over the last 40 years or so, in some cases in Bahrain, for example, even further back. And it's still there. It hasn't been withdrawn. We have bases, military facilities. We have extensive military training and equipping programs with most of these countries. Most of their militaries are constructed along U.S. lines in terms of military doctrine, in terms of the training that they use, and of course, as I mentioned, the equipment. In addition to the military, we have the huge commercial trading relationships with these countries. In the past year with the United Arab Emirates, for example, we had $23 billion in bilateral trade with that country alone, the largest trading relationship. So I think there has been this perception that has developed that the U.S. is pulling back a little bit in the region, but I don't think realities on the ground match up with that. I think we need to work harder to counter this perception, and we need to work harder because of some of the perceptions that developed from the withdrawal from Afghanistan in the last few weeks. I should say, just as a preliminary, that I don't have inside information about what's going on with the negotiations. I think that they have made significant progress. My assessment from things I've read in public accounts is that they have made progress. They're continuing slowly to reach a final stage where they can finish this off. And I think they will. I think it's been a difficult process, but my read of the dynamics is that they will reach an agreement. I mean, nobody can predict the future in the Middle East with certainty. That's right. We're not soothsayers. We can't see the future, but I think and hope that they will reach an agreement. We'll see. I think the sanctions will stay in place until such an agreement is reached, and we'll try to keep significant economic pressure on the Iranian regime until they do reach an agreement. Clearly, the Emirates and other countries in the Gulf are concerned about Iranian influence in Syria. I would say influence writ large. Of course, the militias are a part of it, but it's broader than that. There's a significant number of layers of influence in Syria, and they're concerned, I think, about the whole picture. With regard to whether or not, as a part of the agreement that is reached, that they're going to lift the designation against the IRGC as a terrorist organization, I just don't know enough about the details of the negotiations to be able to comment on that much in a meaningful way. I get your point that the countries in the Gulf, clearly they have been concerned, not just now, but historically over the past half decade or more, with not just Iran's nuclear program, but with those militias that are engaged in what we in the United States call malign activity. In other words, activity that we believe is aimed at destabilizing various situations in the region. And the countries in the Gulf, the Emirates and the Saudis and others, are also concerned about Iran's ballistic missile program. Those are longstanding concerns, and I think they will continue to color the perceptions of Gulf countries. I think for the United States and for countries in Europe, this remains accountability. In other words, the issue of accountability of the regime for crimes that have been committed, war crimes, crimes against humanity. That account remains active, and it is informing our policy and the policies of the Europeans. And we are the two groups that have the sanctions leverage against the Bashar al-Assad regime, and I believe they will stay in place. And it is clear that accountability for those crimes is a driving factor in our policy, and I think it will stay that way. This is an important issue for the Syrian people, and their views have helped to inform, I think, U.S. policy and the policy of Europe, and as well as the United Nations policy in 2254 UN Security Council resolution. And I think it will continue to be that. In the long term, will there be some sort of political solution for Syria? I hope so. I hope that the suffering of the Syrian people will be resolved through a political solution that is fair and just, and represents the views of the Syrian people for a fresh start in Syria. The Gulf countries have worked closely with us over the years. This has been a long-running conflict. We have consulted closely with them. My former boss, Ambassador Jim Jeffrey, met and one of his deputies, Joel Rayburn, met with the senior Gulf officials regularly and kept them informed. And those types of consultations continue. We don't always agree exactly on how to address Syria. It's a very complicated issue, and people disagree about specific aspects of it, given that complexity. And we'll work through those issues, but they're not the types of disagreements that are going to disrupt our critical relations with our friends in the Gulf.